Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I have a little bit of a story I'm going to share with you guys. It came through my feed, was shared with me, and normally I wouldn't jump on this with it being from South Africa because it's such a small country compared to the overall audience here. But the thing is, it didn't just look at South African brands, it covered a lot of American brands, European brands, some major supplement companies. Therefore, it means that this is pretty relevant to all of us, not just South Africa, worthy enough that we need to take a look at it. Now, you guys know in the past, I've covered some of this before, there have been independent testing, including Consumer Reports a few years back, who went through and tested certain aspects of different protein powders and things. And I think it's important that we look at that and we look at the quality controls and independent testing on protein powders, and here's why. Because I'm so anti-supplement, I do try to find the few supplements out there that actually are worthwhile and worth taking. And this is debatable, of course, but protein powders are one of those that for many people actually have a viable use. Not because they have magical muscle growing properties, but that they're sometimes a very convenient and cost-effective way for people to get enough protein in, particularly people like vegetarians, as for example. And a lot of people will say, some vegans will come in and say, well, they should just become vegans. Well, I'm sorry, guys, I don't want to be a dick to you guys, but you're a very small demographic compared to vegetarians. They outnumber vegans 10 to 1. They're actually a much, much bigger group, and therefore they are a very important market for certain companies to reach out to. And so therefore getting enough protein for vegetarians through some of these protein powders is actually something that is very useful for a lot of them to meet their needs. And I'm not saying that people need anywhere near as much protein as it's claimed that they do. I have videos explaining that it's actually a lot lower than most of the people in the industry try to promote. But overall, there are people who can benefit from protein powders, and again, particularly people on budgets. Well, the problem becomes when these protein powders are not safe, and what is on the label is not what's actually in them. For example, when Consumer Reports did their stuff a while back, they found that a bunch of name brands, actually major brands, actually contained either what the FDA would consider unacceptable or outside of their recommendations on the limits of things like arsenic, lead, other heavy metals. So therefore they were potentially dangerous products for people who were consuming multiple servings every day, like chronically as an everyday thing. It could actually become problematic for them over time, potential for at least mild cases of metal poisoning with some of these heavy metals. So the poor quality controls is a problem, and that's actually a really big problem when it's on more expensive name brands like that. We expect lower quality controls on the cheaper stuff, but if you're going to pay more for a big name label, the general assumption is you're getting a higher quality product. And when some of these big name labels had unacceptably high levels of arsenic or lead in them, well, that's a problem. And we run into the same thing when there's an issue with the protein content. And that's what we saw with these protein powders here. Because a lot of college students and younger guys who don't always have the best jobs and they're trying to train a lot, these protein powders are often marketed to them as a convenient, inexpensive source of protein. But the problem that you come into is that, well, if all of a sudden meat becomes a cheaper protein source, or Greek yogurt or anything else, because the label is wrong and it's an already expensive protein, then you got a problem. That's one reason that it's been pointed out that like some of the cheaper Walmart brands, for example, aren't viable. Yeah, they're really cheap. They ended up having only half of the protein in them that they're supposed to have. And I'll come to that in a minute as to situations to where some of the protein spiking doesn't matter, but that's something I'll segue into in a minute. The problem is that it's no longer cost effective if you're getting something as a fairly cheap protein source and it only has 50% of the protein on the label. If you could have just went and bought a whole food that contained more protein and it's less refined and less other potential problems, no lactose or anything like that in it, which is a problem for a massive chunk of the population, well, that it's no longer a good buy for you if it's only 50% what's on the label. The reason people were buying it is because it was really cheap. They needed a cheap protein source. They ended up not getting a good deal. Now with some of these more expensive brands, you're paying for things like better filtration, so it's not going to have lead and arsenic in it, or the lactose being filtered out, which is a big deal for an enormous number of the population. Like at least half of the world's population is lactose intolerant, so lactose in these protein shakes, which is one reason many of us call them fart powders, is a problem for half of the population. So you're paying a little more, sometimes a lot more, hoping for a higher quality, and at the end of the day, you're really hoping that it's going to end up being a good value compared to Whole Foods. in a more convenient package. And that's the whole idea. A lot of guys are willing to pay as much as they will for a whole food because they have a shake they can mix up easy, and then it's going to be safe. They're not going to get arsenic in it or lactose or whatever else it is that they're worried about. They'll go ahead and pay as much as they will for a more expensive meat source or dairy source because they're getting a higher quality and it's still in the same price range. But if you end up getting these powders and they're 15 or 20% underdosed on the protein, you're no longer getting a good deal. You're back to paying more for the same amount of protein, hoping to get a more convenient source. Well, that's not always going to work for everyone, because you could just as easily go buy some Greek yogurt or something and know it's in it because it's a regular food and it's regulated by the FDA a lot more than supplements are. So if you guys look at the little article, we provide all the data. You've got a lot of companies listed there. A lot of them are American companies. A lot of them are European companies. There's some big names on there, and a lot of them are coming back underdosed. Some of them aren't so bad. They're 3, 4, 5%. That's still significant, but then some of the other big companies are 15, 20% low, and a small number of them as much as like 40%. Well, that's really a problem when they're charging a high premium for these products, and you're trying to get this really high quality protein source in a more convenient package, and you're not even getting the amount on the label. That's really ripping people off. They're really at that point going to be better off just going into the grocery store and getting a better tasting, convenient protein source. It's not that hard to grill some chicken breast or a steak real quick. And it's certainly not a problem to grab a tub of Greek yogurt and mix whatever in you want with it to flavor it and just eat it. No cooking required. Or some liquid egg whites or something. Again, you can buy at the store and do a lot of things with those. Some people drink them, some people mix them with stuff, some people cook them real quick. They're like a 5-minute cook in a skillet. For you to make an omelet or to dice some veggies up and throw it in there and make an omelet. So, I mean, there are really convenient protein sources that can be found at the grocery store that you know what you're getting. So it's a problem when these companies that aren't as regulated as your foods are coming back 20% off because you're really paying 20% more for your protein and you're actually going to get a better deal just buying something at the grocery store. So we need to know these things. Now, on a little side note, the whole idea of the protein spiking and the amino spiking has come up, and a lot of people have a problem with that. And I know Mark Lobliner did and other people, and that's an interesting point. They're not necessarily being deceptive, though, when they pad them with aminos and things, if that is considered to be a protein, because what people need to realize, for your purposes, you're not trying to necessarily get a complete protein source to build muscle. Most people who are taking extra protein, you need to understand, most of you aren't really building extra muscle off of it. You're taking it as an appetite suppressant or for the extra thermic effect and everything else. Or, again, to help prevent muscle loss while losing body fat. So if that's the reason a person is taking a protein, that amino spiking actually isn't a problem. Now, we could argue, of course, you're still better off just getting a whole food for that. And I think that's a very valid argument to make because of something that you have to chew up. So like a chicken breast or even egg whites you have to prepare that might digest a little slower, won't have some of the gastric problems a cheaper protein powder is. And if they're spiking aminos in them, you can bet they're probably a cheaper powder. Well, we could argue those still might be a better option in that, but the thing is, at the end of the day, people who are taking these things for any form of weight loss, the amino spiking is probably still going to give them the desired appetite suppressing effects and potentially some of the anti-catabolic effects and everything else. So in that case, the amino spiking isn't that big of a deal. And we could argue, although I don't want to make this argument because I don't like to let the supplementers who get away with bad ethics, but we could argue, since most people are consuming way more than they need who are going and buying these shakes, that they're not actually losing any muscle mass from the amino spiking, since it's technically legally protein and they don't need any extra protein to gain muscle. It's not actually hurting them with the correctly labeled label, although I think we could still argue the ethics of the amino spiking. We're getting into a very gray area on the ethics. And is it something I want to harp on much? No, not really, because there's so much shadier stuff that pretty much every supplement company does out there, that to worry about something as minor as the amino spiking that probably isn't going to negatively affect anyone isn't a bit as big of a deal. I would make a bigger deal out of it if there wasn't so many more insanely more unethical things these same companies do. That's really just kind of like icing on the cake at a certain point with these companies with the bullshit that they pull. So It's potentially a big deal, but I think that one got a little overblown at the end of the day. But I will agree it is bad ethics, and it should probably still be called out. But that's really a slap on the wrist compared to the other stuff. So just wanted to touch on the amino spiking again because that was a big controversy about a year ago online here. So there you guys have it. Check out the article, see what's going on with these companies and which ones didn't pass the test or how much they failed it by. Again, independent testing. So I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.